Welcome to the Valley Today, a public service presentation of the good folks at KAIL TV. The mighty San Joaquin River, rendered dry from years of diverting much of its water to Kern County, is once again flowing and sending fresh water to the Delta. Cited as the hardest working river in the West, this watershed is home to numerous animals. Join us as we speak with Chris Acree, Executive Director of Revive the San Joaquin. It's next on the Valley Today. Welcome to the Valley Today. We are here with Chris Acree with the Revive the San Joaquin, and thanks for being on our show.
Thank you for inviting me.
And of course, we're down here at the San Joaquin, just off of Knees and Palm. And Chris, you've been with Revive the San Joaquin for about 5 years now?
Yeah, coming up on 5 years, and it's a local-based nonprofit that's working with the San Joaquin River and restoration. The restoration opportunity is huge, so we figured, let's get the valley involved with what's happening and find, unique and creative ways of making restoration work for our communities, because it's something that's happening and there's not a lot of resources locally to really get involved. So we're trying to drum up local support and bring additional resources to the restoration effort.
And of course, there's been some resolution with being in the courts, because half the people wanted to bank the water, and half of the people want the water to be going down the San Joaquin so that we can, kind of have a more natural feel of this habitat.
Yeah, well, the river's changing. I think that's the biggest thing. Is it's been pretty low flows of water for the last 60 years, and it actually goes dry just a little bit downstream here. So it's a new river, and not many people know what the river is going to look like, how it's going to act. Like right here, we're looking at a flood stage release here.
Yeah, just after all the 9 inches of rain that we got.
Yeah, so this is a large flow, but this is something more closely to what we'll see with the regular flow of restoration releases, which it creates a big river. We used to have, on average, about 150 cubic feet per second release through the dam.
Right.
And with restoration in the spring, it's going to be up to 4,000, maybe even 8,000 cubic feet per second.
And what do you think it's going down here now?
What's that?
The flow?
I think it's up at 4,000 to 6,000 cubic feet per second.
But of course, this is contributing streams, not only coming off the dam, but there's also...
Yeah, there's a few small, Cottonwood Creek and Sandy, but it's filling out. They're releasing through the dam to make more space for next.
Well, this is beautiful, It really is.
Yeah, this is a bigger river than you usually see down here.
Yeah.
Usually it's, knee deep and you can ankle, wade across it, but right now it's pretty deep.
A lot of people have brought their dogs, they're enjoying the river.
Yeah.
Oh, this is wonderful. Well, to give us a brief history of the San Joaquin, I guess it was dammed was it dammed before the war or right after the war?
After the war, early 40s is when they completed the dam itself. It took a little bit longer to complete the canals, the Friant Kern Canal and the Madera Canal.
Right.
But it's catching a lot of water. This watershed is over 1,100 square miles up in the upper watershed, and it's just this huge canyon with so many dams now, and there's so many basins that store water. It's really high elevation watershed.
Right.
So it's really buffered from the impacts of climate change, so there's more snow up in that watershed.
Right.
And it's really prone to historically, it's been really prone to flooding because it's such a deep canyon. It's so steep, it just shoots water down into the valley, and that's why we have such a level valley here.
Right.
But now that it's dammed, we have these new concerns where that watershed can't flush all that water out. So the nature of water in this basin of rainfall, it's either drought or flood. I mean, there's not like other areas have very steady rainfall, and they can factor that into their infrastructure.
Sure.
We did what we could at the time.
Yeah.
And on those wet flood years, we get spills like every 4 years. I think water spills over the top of the dam. So there is some surplus water in this watershed.
Right.
But most of the time, it's either a drought or a flood. There's never like an average year, so it's really hard to manage water.
So the Friant Kern is diverting water to Kern County, and about half the water that comes into the watershed gets sent down.
About 95% of the water leaves the county. Yeah, it's really interesting because when the dam was built, Fresno and Madera, we secured some water rights that were adequate for the growth then, but since then nothing's changed. All the water essentially from the watershed is diverted outside of this region, And it's kind of contributes to these problems. You know, Fresno, Madera have the worst groundwater overdraft in the state. And when we're saying, well, why is that? If we have the most water, why do we have the worst groundwater problems? And
sure, but of course they're doing, the Water Authority is doing that also with San Luis Reservoir, where you know, the water's getting pumped down there and stored until it's needed for the west side.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of new management options emerging, and with restoration, that's half of the restoration project. Half of it is fisheries management, getting the water back in the river, trying to get the salmon flowing back back up this way.
Right.
But then the other half is a water management team that has all the Friant water user districts involved. And they're looking for creative ways to get that water. You know, I was saying that the capacity is not there.
Right.
What restoration does is it flushes water through the bottom of the dam from the canals that are about a third of the way or halfway up the dam. All that storage space below those canals is essentially, they call it dead space. It's water that is stored from year to year, but it can't be used.
Right.
Now that we have restoration, we flush a lot of that water through the bottom of the dam, and that actually creates more storage each year for additional water capture. So we might, with restoration, we might have eliminated a lot of that flooding problem that we've seen historically.
Sure, because you're letting the water go down.
Yeah, more in a steady release.
This is building up the water table also, because as this percolates,
that's kind of a side benefit of restoration, is local groundwater recharge. A lot of the farming operations near the river are going to benefit. The cities that use the groundwater are going to benefit. But it's kind of an external impact from restoration.
Sure.
The water that's released through the dam, actually the water rights remain intact with the Friant water users.
Right.
So it pushes this water out towards the delta, but where there's capacity to pump that water back down south, those water rights, all this water that moves from here to the delta, will be recaptured.
Right, because it's a loss at a certain point, because once it gets to the delta where there's plenty of water, then that's just a loss to flush it into the ocean, don't you think?
That delta is that there's a giant crisis in the delta right now.
Sure.
The fisheries are collapsing, the water qualities poor, and that's because there's not enough fresh water hitting the delta.
Right.
So we're saying that the restoration program, putting all this water to the delta, is going to flush out those salty waters that have been over pumped and all that. So as much fresh water as we manage our water resources, as much fresh water as we can get to the delta, we're not only fixing our problem here. We're also fixing the health of the delta, and we hear about the smelt going extinct. That's because they don't have enough freshwater pools to survive in.
Sure.
They're in these salty water pools.
Right.
And that pumping, if this water is all delivered to where those pumps are, we've heard a lot about the water pumps being shut off.
Right.
If we can get this fresh water there, we have a whole new source of clean water and fresh water to pump. So it's beneficial all the way around. And if there are some limitations at the beginning of the program, we can't circulate all this water right away, but part of the restoration is actually developing more groundwater storage and other programs to actually utilize this new water supply that's being created.
So in the old cycle where the water was being diverted to Kern County, water being released down the San Joaquin, was there ever any part of the year or any part of the season where water would be released and it would actually reach the Mendota Pool?
Most of that river, there's 60 miles of dry river for the last 60 years.
Right.
It's between Gravelly Ford, which is out towards Kerman, and Mendota was dry.
So boom, that's it.
Yeah, and then Mendota Pool is always full of the delta water that's pumped south.
It's pumped south.
And that water is actually getting saltier and saltier as we don't have more fresh water inputs to the delta. So
now we've got they've gotten this fresh water now down to the Mendota Pool, right?
Yeah, no. So the fresh water now goes all the way. It goes to the pool, but most of it's being diverted through the flood bypasses until the restoration program can. The Mendota Pool Dam would restrict salmon movement.
Right.
So they're talking about either moving that Mendota Dam upstream a bit outside of the main river channel, or doing a bypass segment. So there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be developed.
Now, was that dam to stop the salt water coming south, or was that dam?
That dam is to create a little pool of water that can be pumped to the exchange contractors out there in the Mendota Pool area.
Yeah, and forgive me for being ignorant, but I don't know all the dynamics of what's going on.
It's a complicated system.
It's very complicated.
But most people see in Mendota, they see that water, and in Firebaugh, you see the water in the river.
Right.
They assume it's coming from the Sierras, but that's been pumped back south.
Right, yeah. That was the project
that
they came up with in the 60s, right?
Yeah, and that's going to maintain they're still going to do that pumping, but maybe there could be some added benefit from restoration. If this fresh water is flowing through there, they might be able to reduce some pumping.
So what entails restoration? I mean, what are we talking about?
It's a big project. Like I said, it's split into two. Half of the project is fisheries management, getting the salmon back. making sure the water and the habitat's there.
Do they have to be re-educated? I mean, or are they going to just? If they have fresh water, are they going to start hitting it when during the spawning season?
Yeah, well, there's been a barrier there at the Hills Ferry. There's been a barrier where the Merced confluence hits the San Joaquin.
Right.
Right now there are salmon coming up into the valley, up the Merced River, spawning and leaving.
Yeah.
Because of that disconnect in the San Joaquin system, they've traditionally barriered, or they've closed off the San Joaquin River.
Right.
Because the returning salmon would just dead end in agricultural tailwater and would probably die off. So finally, now that we have the reconnection, all they have to do is remove the barrier and make sure the salmon can come up. And actually this year, some salmon were returning up to the Mendota Pool and bumping up against that because the old fish ladders are dead. But so we just need a little more infrastructure, and they're begging to come back.
So they've got fish ladders there that perhaps that they could turn back on?
Well, that's still a subject of restoration, is the infrastructure. How are we going to do it? We're working on the environmental impact reports right now to determine what are the best options for infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're out of time on this segment, and where are we going to next?
Let's go to the Bluff.
We are at one of the public access parks now, River Bluff at Palm and Knees.
Yep.
And the neat thing about this is if you approach the bluff, you can get a pretty good panoramic view of the river bottom below.
Yeah, we're on the San Joaquin River Bluff here in Fresno, and there's not a whole lot of places to actually access the bluff and get these views, so it's kind of a unique spot here.
So I think for the developer to be able to do this, they had to create this park, I think.
Well, it's the San Joaquin River itself is a public resource,
right? And
how we develop, and when we encroach on these bluffs, how we develop is very important because it is still the public's access point to the river.
Sure.
And like we saw earlier, that's a private access point to a public resource. So it's kind of a.
I didn't even know that existed.
A lot of people don't.
Yeah. But of course, it was interesting to see. A couple people were coming down and they had their dogs and they were playing frisbee. They're getting the dogs in the water, and for what it is, it looked pretty pristine.
Yeah, I mean, the whole river itself, I mean, there's kind of a myth that the San Joaquin River is a dump because we hear a lot about the pollution problems down farther south. But up here below Millerton, it's actually very clean water and a pretty pristine area. There's not a lot of public access, which has kind of preserved it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So. And it was interesting, you were talking about going to, was it Mendota High School, and you had some kids?
Yeah, we've partnered with the San Joaquin River Stewardship Program and some other groups, and we're getting people out on the river doing cleanups, plantings. On Martin Luther King Day next Monday, we are going to do a native tree planting up on Cottonwood Creek too.
Oh, cool.
So we're getting people out there as much as we can to see the river, because that's really when people start taking ownership, is when they see what's out there.
Well, let's go approach the bluff and see what we shall see. And of course, cleanup's going to be a little more problematic now because you're going to have water in the river, so you won't be able to actually get in the riverbed itself and dig stuff out with water impeding you.
Well, you get your fins on and your mask and dive for old car tires.
Sure. So I guess one thing is there any groups that take canoe trips down from Friant Town?
Yeah, there's a couple groups. Rivertree Volunteers. I think they've.
There we go. I like that. That's good. Huh?
Rivertree Volunteers is one. They have about, I think, 12 boats, and they do regular cleanups and restoration projects. I think over the years they said they've taken out something like 10,000 tires out of the San Joaquin River. Yeah. So there are groups that are active.
How do the tires get in the river? I mean, you have to be.
You have bridges and you have dump trucks. Who knows?
My God. I mean, that sounds crazy.
With that many tires, I mean, it's just something people have to pay for disposal. So they'd rather just find a public access point and go dump their truckloads. It's kind of a shame. But
now, does that create little micro ecosystems for crayfish? Or?
Not really. Nothing but damage, really. But even with it, there's not a whole lot of groups working on the San Joaquin, but I think most of them do integrate, cleanups and restoration activities into their work. And we could use another 50 groups doing it to really tackle the problem. So.
And so public access is kind of where you guys are, of course, Revive the San Joaquin wants to see the river revived, but also to clean it up and maybe have a little more public access to it also. Yeah,
there's definitely a need for public access. We just did a boating trip during the last test runs of restoration flows, and we were going about it was almost 25, 30 miles a day because of the new flows really pushing you through. We went to the Grasslands Wildlife Area, just beautiful wildlife sanctuaries out in the middle of the valley. And at the same time, you're saying, wow, this, no one knows this is here. But at the same time, it's hard to access that. We had to do 30 miles a day and camp on little beaches that were probably private property. We didn't know because we were just kind of, you're going downriver, but there definitely needs to be some sort of coordinated system so people could access and recreate on the river in a way that's, that doesn't create these problems like dumping and all that.
So I guess the folks down at, there's a park down by Kerman, 145 in the river. I can't remember the name of that park, but they've got to be happy that there's going to be more water for them to go play in.
Oh yeah, I mean cleaner water for sure.
Yeah,
and then during the spring, it's kind of a mixed bag where when those high restoration flows come through, some of those areas that people normally swim in might become a little more dangerous. So it's a changing river system. We have to really pay attention to what's happening and what needs to happen as far as public outreach and infrastructure and all that.
And I can imagine that, with the river being revived, that, the sport fishermen are going to, be digging this because there's going to be more fish for the state to be able to license and for, individuals to be able to catch.
Yeah, well, the salmon is the focus of restoration, but with the salmon, once we open up the river to this delta species and this ocean fish, we're getting, I think it's 34 native species that should come back with the salmon. There's like the Sacramento perch, steelhead trout that come back and forth from the ocean, a couple different species of salmon, and so there's all sorts of native fish that have been gone for years that are going to come back and really change the dynamic of the river system. And we don't really know what we're going to expect yet, but it'll be interesting to see how that happens.
And of course, other native species, once the ecosystem improves, then the habitat will, generate more animals, more mammals. I can imagine that you've got a lot of beavers here as it is. But,
in some areas, there are a lot of beavers.
Yeah. Well, this is quite a view. We can see children's. We got lucky today with the weather too. But too bad we didn't tape this last week when you could see all the way to the ocean. Huh?
It's pretty clear today.
Yeah. Now, were these old mining pits?
Yeah, these are old mining pits, and the river channel. Back in the days before it was dammed, when the high waters would come, it would just flood bluff to bluff. It'd be a shallower river, but there would be a main channel. And even steamboats would come. You could see a steamboat actually coming through this area back in the early 1900s.
That's pretty wild.
It is wild.
Now, was that seasonal? The boats couldn't access year-round,
No, seasonal, yeah. And so they'd farm, and then they would use the waters when they were high enough to export their products to the Bay Area. And some of the early historians even projected that the San Joaquin Valley was going to be a giant network of seagoing freighters. They even talked about deep dredging the San Joaquin. They had plans for it.
Yeah.
But that was right when the rail lines started and provided more reliable transportation. So it was kind of a mixed bag. We could have almost hit that point where the rivers would have been destroyed long ago through creating like a Panama Canal style deep dredge channel. So we kind of escaped disaster there.
That's fascinating. I never heard that, but I can imagine, with a fertile mind, you could come up with all kinds of
this river.
It's
ideas. Been called the hardest working water in the world because it started off as gold mining, and then that didn't pan out. So we started logging. We built the big log flumes that came down to the valley. Then they built the largest hydroelectric system in the world on the upper San Joaquin, and it's still, I think, one of the largest hydroelectric systems in the entire world on our watershed. And then eventually water storage, agriculture. So the water here, it feeds cities, agriculture, recreation, water supply, all at the same time.
Right.
And that creates what we see as this complicated
So do you think for the most part the lawsuits are over now? I mean, this thing has been going. The water rights have been going. The lawsuits have been going for at least 20 years.
Yeah. Well, our Revive the San Joaquin, we're still involved with 3 lawsuits currently, and they're mostly based around new development practices. The San Joaquin Valley by 2050 is going to add another 1.1 or 2 million people to this area.
Right.
So the current trend is we're moving out toward the San Joaquin River corridor, like what we're seeing here.
Right.
The development pressure is moving
everything
toward
is pushed
the river.
north. Fresno is pushed north.
So our concern, the water rights have been, less of an issue in our mind than the actual pollution that's going to be, the changing landscape here for development is pushing the development pressure toward the bluffs, and in all the new developments out by Millerton and in Madera and Fresno County, there's individual private projects. When combined together, it creates the city the size of Visalia. And there is no municipal wastewater system, so each project...
So you're telling me that there's on tap to be 150,000 people that are
There's already plans approved in Madera County and Fresno County for a city that's about the size of Visalia to be placed right over the San Joaquin River corridor.
In the next 40 years?
In the next 30 years.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, and not many people know about this, but the plans, because they're private projects, there's not much coordinated activity, with the local planning. So they're planning on putting wastewater into the San Joaquin River, and if
treated wastewater.
Treated wastewater.
Yeah.
And when you have 2 or 3 developments in the same spot putting their treated wastewater in, treatment doesn't remove pharmaceuticals and other of the reproductive cycles.
You're going to have salmon on steroids now, and they're going to be tough.
if it was only like
and I don't mean to tease. I mean, I'm just throwing out a really wild point there.
No, exactly.
But, it's not good. Yeah. It's not good.
And it could destroy, all the efforts for restoration, a $750 million project. Yeah. And 1 or 2 development projects poorly planned could risk that entire progress.
Couldn't we pump all that sewage to the waste treatment facility?
Well, if the projects were within the growth spheres of Fresno, you could connect with the municipal infrastructure. But because they're so far out, they're 20 miles out of town, up by Friant and Millerton.
Well, they're out of the sphere of the city's
They
influence.
have to create their own infrastructure.
Sure. Yeah. So it's coming.
Yeah, the development is coming out there, and that's one of our biggest issues.
And that was the great thing about this downturn in the economy, was that it slowed development, it slowed building.
It didn't slow planning, though.
No, but it did slow building, and so you've got a lot of tracks that started that didn't finish. Yeah. And I kind of think that it was a good thing. It kind of gave us time to reflect, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, but at the same time, they've been working on planning for this new growth area, and that has been going full steam, and it hasn't slowed at all with the economy.
Sure. So. Now, are you looking for volunteers? You're looking for donations?
Yeah, we do all sorts of work. Like I said, cleanups, restoration projects, local community activism, and we really need members. So that's really our big push, is to get people to join Revive the San Joaquin.
Okay. And how can they contact you?
We have a website, www.revivethesanjoaquin.org.
Okay.
Or you can call us at 559-226-0733.
Okay, great.
And we're going to keep doing what we do. So I hope to talk to you again when we see some new progress.
After interviewing you, it sounds positive to where this is all going. We've got some water going downstream now, and some people aren't crazy about it. Some other people just think it's just the greatest thing since sliced bread. And we're always going to have debate on that. But, it's good to see a healthy ecosystem.
It is. It's good to see it come back, because, this valley, this Fresno region, really, we built our infrastructure, shipped the water out, and now it's nice to see some return and some benefits coming from our river system. So.
Absolutely. Well, Chris Acree, thank you so much for being on the Valley today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And the Valley today is a public service presentation of this great TV station. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.